Welcome to CareTalk, America's home for incisive debate about healthcare business and policy. I'm David Williams, president of Health Business Group.
And I'm John Driscoll, the CEO of CareCentrix. David, a new Supreme Court nominee, Justice Ketanji Jackson. I mean, what more can you say given her experience, her grace under pressure? But perhaps we could talk a little bit about healthcare.
Well, sure, John. You know, the thing is the American Bar Association and the Democratic senators certainly held her up as an incredible judge. She certainly more than held her own in front of the panel. You know, I was a little scratching my head because some of those on the other side of the aisle, we're seeing her and portraying her as like soft on porn, critical race theorist. But we really haven't learned a whole lot about her view on healthcare and what it would mean to have her on the Supreme Court from a healthcare standpoint. And so let's fill that void. Let's not ask stupid questions. Let's ask about where she is on healthcare. So, John, I mean, what is Judge Jackson's record on healthcare?
Well, it's a little bit thin, truth be told. I mean, her depth as a former public defender, a corporate litigator, a jurist, and someone who actually is serving in one of the most important districts at the federal level, has not really been engaged a lot in healthcare. But let's start with the fact that her husband is a general surgeon, that all hard healthcare decisions, whether it's about abortion or the ACA, tend to get kicked to the court now. And so even though the record's a little bit thin in a divided country with political leaders that don't work to reconcile and actually make many decisions, I think we can expect. And already we have courts cases in front of the court that are going to challenge whether it's the how we actually cover and manage healthcare benefits or things like women's right to choose. They're going to be center middle. So I think we've got to dig a little bit, David. What have you learned about her healthcare background?
Well, you know, you're right that she hasn't had that many healthcare rulings. So let's look at where, what hints we have. So one, the fact is, she's been nominated by President Biden, who's obviously a strong supporter of the Affordable Care Act since he was very involved with it. She's supported by some of the organizations that support a woman's right to choose. So I think it's clear probably where she stands there. Now, she does have some specific expertise, let's say, on drug sentencing, which is, I'd say, related to a healthcare issue. She was on the bipartisan U.S. Sentencing Commission that rewrote the guidelines about focused on reducing the penalties for drug-related crimes. That's one thing. She also is involved in some rulings on the CDC pandemic-related eviction moratorium. She was part of a three-judge panel there. She's actually had a couple of things related to Massachusetts about buffer zones for people entering abortion clinics and some more technical things on hospitals. And she had done a ruling against the termination of a federal grants program on teen pregnancy prevention. This was a focus more on the administrative side, though, not the contents of the grant. So there are some things there that you can look at and see she considers the cases very carefully and hasn't issued any, crazy rulings. And one way to measure that is actually her rulings tend not to get overturned. That's one of the things that the American Bar Association noted in giving her the highest rating.
But I think the place where we ought to be focusing on healthcare is the most important one is the one that drew the most ire of and attention of some of the stranger attacks. You saw Senator Kennedy from Louisiana, Senator Blackburn from Tennessee, and others really trying to, in sort of an inappropriate way, try to get her to speak to whether it was the when life begins or how she would decide to basically share with the Senate, which is completely inappropriate, exactly where she is on the women's right to choose an abortion, because like any court case, there are two or three things you need to think about. One is facts and circumstances, and so all Supreme Court nominees need to avoid answering hypothetical questions. Two, there is it is prudent in a country that wants our Supreme Court judges to be, to stay in black robes, not in red robes or blue robes or purple robes for that matter, to be seen as clearly an independent judiciary. And three, there is this concept of stare decisis. And I know that you took Latin.
I did, John. I only read books in Latin.
And so, David, tell us a little bit about what the principle of stare decisis is and why it's so relevant in this circumstance of asking a nominee to the court about how they will decide.
Well, John, I don't want to go over any of the the listeners' heads with the various Latin terms, but the direction I was going to go, John, is that you want to ask her questions about how she rule on certain cases and so on, but a lot of this has to do with what's shifting on the court. She's replacing a justice who retired voluntarily, and Justice Breyer, who we did a show about before on healthcare. In general, he was not a person that was kind of outspoken and ideological. He actually was an outspoken proponent of abortion rights. She's going to be not any more of an outspoken proponent than he was. So she's not going to do anything to shift, where the court is going.
Yeah, remember the court is in a 6-3 conservative to liberal base. I think everyone has the expectation that she will be passed on to the court and take that third liberal seat, as it were. But I actually think that the stare decisis, which is basically the principle that if the court has made at least in layman's terms, if the court has made a decision that precedent would hold. And what's interesting about abortion and the right to choose, the right to terminate a pregnancy, is both conservative Justice Neil Kavanaugh during his confirmation hearing and very conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett said in her hearing exactly what Judge Jackson said, which is that it has been settled by the decision on abortion and choice has been settled by the court with regard to its previous decisions. And so I think it's going to be really interesting. It's clearly a lot of pro-life groups are trying to break down and challenge Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court has chosen a majority against minority. Majority conservatives has just chose not to intervene. This is clearly a hot button issue that probably would be better resolved with at the legislative area. It's definitely going to the court. And it was striking to me that the liberal nominee Jackson was using very similar language that the conservatives had used. And I think it was slightly more hopeful than I would have guessed. She gave no ground on that one. And I think that's probably the most important healthcare issue that's going to hit and affect the healthcare system that's going to come in front of the court. And there are cases right now that will at least come to the court to potentially be litigated in front of the Supreme Court.
So, John, as you mentioned, she'll be part of a minority, and the minority is 6-3. It wouldn't be that way, if the Republicans had not played dirty with Merrick Garland under President Obama. So there's a reason that is tilted this way. I'm personally still very angry about that because I think it really went right against kind of the whole spirit of doing things the right way in this country. So I just want to mention that. But when she replaces Justice Breyer, he at least had a more kind of a bipartisan. He worked in more of a bipartisan era, and he was more of a deal maker. So he was able to, even in the minority, to be able to save the Affordable Care Act, as we had talked about, and getting something, even if he didn't get everything. He didn't want to write a dissent. He wanted to be sway the majority in his direction. Now, what's changed, I think he may have been a little bit naive at this point because the world has changed. I don't think she's as naive as he is. And also the issue with some of these more recently appointed judges that want to focus on quote unquote originalism. They think they're going to find just the answer right in the Constitution, and that the discussions with the colleagues don't matter. So I'm not sure that she'll have that much of an impact, at least in the next decade or two. But John, beyond abortion, maybe there are a couple of other areas that we're going to see the Supreme Court get involved in. I mean, there's going to be probably other pandemic-related, COVID-related, or other pandemic-related issues, I would imagine, that would come up. Probably some issues on sort of employer, rights about determining healthcare coverage, even if not Affordable Care Act. I think if it's just abortion, she's not going to be too influential.
But I think you're understating her natural collaborative nature. Everything I've read suggests that actually she is a collaborator. Heck, I mean, she's actually related by marriage to former, conservative Congressman Paul Ryan. She has had judges that were appointed by Ronald Reagan endorse her qualifications for the highest court in the land. I suspect that she will bring that same collaborative approach that Justice Breyer has, and it doesn't surprise me that the president nominated someone who I think will work to create coalitions with the court that could actually potentially we would have more of a collaborative conversation behind behind the bench than one expects, given the hothouse atmosphere. Honestly, the hearings themselves were embarrassing. It did not bring great honor on the Senate. We'll just leave it at that. With, Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and Martha Black, really trying to go after and unsettle her character. But gosh, David, I was really impressed with her grace under pressure, her hope, her thoughtfulness. I mean, sometimes there are moments of grace and eloquence that break through the cable news craziness, and I thought the hearings showed some of that on her part.
John, we're both obviously middle-aged, or in your case, a bit older white men, and not in a position to necessarily, be able to empathize with a black woman. But I saw a column in the Boston Globe today, and just seeing some other commentary about sort of the combination of misogyny and racism, which she's faced it and had to be 10 times as good as somebody else in that position. And she really was impressive, and she will improve the Supreme Court. There's no doubt about it.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know whether you knew, David, that when she was at Harvard, she was part of the Black Students Association. And there was this is in the 80s, someone put up a Confederate flag, and the leadership at Harvard refused to take it down because they thought it was an issue of free speech. And there was some protests and some activity. And one of the things that later Justice Jackson insisted is that we have to keep studying. We have to keep getting good grades so that we're in a position when we graduate from this place, not just to march in the streets or criticize racist activity, but we're in a position to do something about it. I think that's that practical idealism that she showed even as a student is gonna wear well. And the other thing I think that she brings to the court, which is not a direct healthcare issue, is an understanding, having worked as a public defender, of frankly how the criminal justice system fails our society from a healthcare perspective. There's no question that as a public defender or someone who's worked in criminal justice, you are a front seat in the failure of, for example, the absence of drug treatment in our prisons. The challenges, the healthcare challenges that sometimes are crippling for folks who are in that system, and that to bring sort of an enlightened view there. Mind you, she was also endorsed by the Fraternal Order of the Cops. She's had, I think, at least 3 relatives who were involved in law enforcement, and she was been universally praised by those in law enforcement as well. But I do think that perspective of some of the challenges of our criminal justice system, that's also a point of real failure for the U.S. healthcare.
Fair enough, John. So I was going to ask you a question about whether you think she'll be confirmed, but since you've been referring to her throughout, the nominee throughout here as Justice Jackson, which she will presumably be Associate Justice if she's confirmed, I guess you do think she'll be confirmed. So I'll skip through that one and say, what happens next, John? What happens if it's not a liberal that retires, but let's say one of the others in the majority who for some reason needs to step down, and the Senate either is or is not controlled by Democrats? I mean, what comes next year?
I think it's really hard to tell. To your point, the Merrick Garland precedent is pretty ugly, and Mitch McConnell, if he's this is not a House of Representatives thing. This is a Senate thing. Senate leadership has shown that they will twist the rules in order to kind of maintain the court. But I think there's I don't think there's much of a prediction there. But I will predict that she will be passed by the Senate and approved by the Senate, that every Democrat will vote for her, which gets you 50 votes. The vice president could be the tie vote, but I suspect she will also get some Republican votes because although some of the comments have been sort of, and questions have been kind of screwball and inappropriate and offensive, frankly, that the majority of the Senate, all the Democrats, and I suspect a few Republicans, will agree that she is well qualified to serve on the Supreme Court. So I may be jumping the gun a little bit in announcing that Judge Jackson should be referred to as Justice Jackson, but she sure showed me, and I think many, that through grace, intelligence, and courage, that she might be just a spectacular jurist.
Fantastic. Well, John, that's it for yet another edition of CareTalk. We've been talking today about soon to be, perhaps, Justice, currently Judge Jackson. I'm David Williams, president of Health Business Group.
And I'm John Driscoll, the CEO of CareCentrix. If you like what you heard and you'd like to hear more, please subscribe on your favorite service.